Hello and welcome back to A Case for Cannabis. My name is Alfredo Matthew, the founder of Working World LLC, and I am here today with Jocelyn Sheltraw, the head of industry at Headset. Welcome, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Alfredo. Happy to be here.
So exciting to talk to you today. You have such a fascinating background. Before we get into everything, tell me, how do you like moving from San Francisco to Oakland?
Oh my gosh, I love it. More space and warmer weather. You can't beat that. And there's an energy and enthusiasm to Oakland that feels so new and exciting. So I love it.
Cool. And you're coming from the cannabis industry in San Francisco. A lot of the industry has moved to the East Bay. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California, and upon graduating college, the iPhone came out a year later. And so I initially started my career working with app developers, and I was working on some of the biggest apps that we use today, like Uber and Flipboard and Pandora, et cetera. And so I was part of this industry that was just a Wild West, new emerging industry. Everyone was learning what this was and how it would have an impact on our society. And I just had the most fun, like living in San Francisco during this Tech 2.0 period. It was the time of my life. And so I'd started thinking about, okay, what is the next industry to which is that I could replicate this career journey and that would have this impact on our society like mobile apps did. And so I'd been eyeing the cannabis industry started 6 years ago especially being in California, upon going to Prop 215 and having medical use here. Knowing that recreational was just down the road. And so I started looking at, what the opportunities in cannabis could be. And then because I'm a big networker, I happened to meet the founder of our company, who was one of the original founders of Leafly, which coming from the app space and just being this huge cannabis enthusiast for about 15 years, I was in awe of what they built. And so I'd been introduced to our founder. He told me what he was working on with Headset. And we were off to the races from there. I was just so interested in kind of the data side of things and having that tech background, and then being able to pair that with a great passion of mine, cannabis. It's like the universe all kind of conspired for this to work out. And I've been the last 4 years having the time of my life and just feel like I'm contributing to something that is so much bigger than myself, which has just entirely impacted my whole life as a person and kind of what I'm doing with my time. So it's been incredible.
That's great. Definitely the wild, wild west.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
California, amazing place for innovation.
Yep.
Mobile development, amazing. Cannabis, also legacy industry to California. And it is a rapidly changing landscape in terms of policy, in terms of the way businesses are shaped. What does Headset do, and what do you do for Headset?
Yeah, so Headset is a cannabis data and analytics company. And so what we do is we are a software company at our core. So we built this piece of technology that a dispensary would use to understand all of their point of sale data. And so what that's doing is when they see every transaction that's being sold through, they can take all of that insights, all that information, and they can use that to understand what products they want to stock on their shelves. They can understand who their customers are. So it's analytics for the dispensary. And then what we do on the back end is all of those integrations that we have with the point of sale system. So all of that transaction data that we're pulling from the dispensaries, what we do is we aggregate that. So we collect all of that data. And then once we have a large enough sample size of data, we can then run a bunch of statistical methodologies to forecast it up for what that entire state or Canadian province is doing in terms of sales. So meaning we can see exactly what's being sold through in legal dispensaries in real time. And then producers are using that to say, okay, I see, flower makes up 40% of the sales in California. Here's all the brands that are in the market right now. Here's what they're pricing their products at. Here's who's buying those different types of products. And then it gives the insights for those producers to go figure out what they want to create themselves and then how they're going to market that product.
This really is helping the cannabis industry grow up and formalize, right? Decades and decades and decades. Cannabis has been around. It's an industry, but it has not had that formal infrastructure.
Yeah.
And just the nature of the way cannabis regulation requires everything to have a SKU code and everything to be tracked, this truly is like a 21st century commodity industry growing and developing right in front of our eyes.
Completely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's like if you think about on the cultivation side, prior to us having a legal industry or the technologies to help the industry grow, how would you know as a cultivator what strains would resonate with people? How would you know what products, what edibles to create? You would have been kind of flying blind and really just making those decisions based off your gut instinct, which is also an incredible tool. That's also a data source, right?
Yeah.
But it's really beneficial and just saves businesses a lot of time and people a lot of, heartache and knowing what to create based off of market demand.
Entrepreneurs benefit tremendously from this, but also policymakers.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right? So you're kind of providing the data and the analytics to help policymakers make decisions, entrepreneurs make decisions. Are you actively recruiting and building relationships on both sides, or how do you spend your time?
Absolutely. Okay, so what I do at Headset is I'm responsible for all of our market expansion, driving brand awareness for what we're doing, because this is so new, right? When you talk about data in the cannabis industry, most people are like, what are you talking about? Or when you talk about technologies that you're going to use, this is very, very new. And so a big part of helping educate each state or each Canadian province, a really important part of that has been getting involved with different state level associations. And that's even more so important in the cannabis industry because we're not a federally recognized industry. We are all state run.
Yeah.
And so that means that the policies differ. It means that the ethos of that community is different based off each market. And so having an opportunity to really get involved at the association level to understand, what does this community look like? Who are the different companies that are in this community? What are the policies that are affecting how businesses run? It's been so important, not just for us as a business strategy, but for us to really have that community involvement and build trust.
Yeah.
And so we're working with 12 different associations across the United States and Canada. California cannabis industry is one that I'm on the board of directors for. And so just having that level of involvement, sharing what we're learning from Headset, a lot of these associations are taking that information and they're then educating policymakers and regulators as to what's happening in the legal industry so that, fair and equitable policy can then be implemented based off of some of that data.
Yeah. And just the nature of how cannabis has grown from, medical marijuana to recreational, it has been a rough journey, right? The excessive taxation, not really understanding how this market is going to develop or going to work. That journey has been incredibly hard for entrepreneurs to navigate the regulatory environment. How is the CCAI, how are you and your fellows trying to prepare the state to create more equitable, policies that can really support the industry's growth so it doesn't get strangled before it develops?
Yeah. So this year has probably been one of the hardest that I've seen in the last 4 years. And from what I'm hearing from other producers and from the CCIA, this certainly is the hardest year, and it's a confluence of several different things happening, which policy is a major aspect of that. So, for example, for cannabis, there's 8 different taxes that an operator would then have at the end of the day before that product actually gets sold through. And so
Interesting. Before it gets sold, you pay the taxes before the product.
Through the whole seed to sale process, there's 8 different taxes, yes, before that product actually gets sold into the dispensary. And so when you think about the high taxes that cannabis has on it, and then also in California, which is a state of 40 million people, and we only have a third of our cities, a third of our jurisdictions throughout California have actually voted in cannabis and having legal cannabis businesses. And this is despite, with Prop 64 in 2018 deciding that the state was going to be legal, you still have dry counties through 2/3 of our state. Mm-hmm. And what's happened is that we now have these 850-ish licensed dispensaries throughout the state, only available in those 1/3 of jurisdictions. And then meanwhile, the illicit market, these traditional, retail businesses, traditional, cultivators, they're not regulated businesses. And so now we have, the latest number I heard was 3,000 of those throughout the state. And so what's happened is you have this dynamic of these really high taxes that makes it very challenging for business to operate. You pair that with the fact that a legal cannabis business doesn't have the normal tax deductions, the normal business deductions that any regular business would have.
Yeah.
Then you pair that with this dynamic where you've got this thriving illicit market, which prices are a third of the cost, if not cheaper, than you're going to get on the legal market. And so it creates this dynamic where it's just really hard to run a profitable business because just out the door, you're paying so much for compliance and regulation and taxes, and then you've got a limited number of retailers you can sell into. And so this is where the policy then becomes incredibly important for the health of our industry.
Yeah.
And so what CCIA is really focused on right now is that tax reform. So it's, eliminating the cultivation tax. It's broader tax reform across those other, 7 taxes that we have. And then it's really opening up access to the rest of the state so that we don't have to have these areas where there's, dense populations of illicit stores.
Take me into the future, right? Part of this campaign, Case for Cannabis, is to destigmatize the industry and to understand that this industry is here. It's not going anywhere. It is going to grow. It is going to eventually become legalized. What could this industry look like in 5 or 10 years? What do you hope it looks like?
Well, I hope that cannabis is widely integrated through our society in the next 5 to 10 years. I think it's highly likely that cannabis will be federally legalized in the next 5 years. In the next 10 years, I think we're going to start to see it be more widely adopted through our society. So, with cannabis, it touches recreational, it touches medicinal purposes, it touches spiritual purposes, and then, of course, the material goods side of hemp.
Yeah.
And so we're going to start to see cannabis more widely adopted through all of those aspects of our society. And so it's going to be really exciting from both the recreational, the medicinal side to see things like tourism and consumption lounges and being able to consume at a concert or an event just in the normal ways that you would be consuming an alcoholic beverage. We'll start to see those same opportunities in cannabis. And so I think that's really exciting for our society because there's so much economic benefit to the industry. There is so much benefit. You're seeing a lot of people move from alcohol into, we call it Cali sober. So people using cannabis as opposed to alcohol. You're seeing a lot of people use it for spiritual reasons, right? There's a lot of mindfulness. You see a lot of yoga in cannabis. And so there's just so many different aspects of the plant that people are using for reasons that touch, their soul. And we don't even know the potentials yet. Yeah. But I do believe in those 10 years widely adopted through our society.
And we're coming from, right? I'm a kid of the 80s, drugs, black and white, right? So there was war on drugs. Cannabis was very much a part of this, right, whole thing. There's a lot of incarceration. There's a lot of trauma that comes from, the way cannabis is dealt with in our society. And it's been like a watershed, like just a tremendous shift in the last 5 years. It's like, where are we going to be 5 years from now? And one of the shifts that is starting to happen is that higher education is starting to understand that this is an industry like every other industry. There are jobs in this industry. It's actually the fastest growing job creator in the United States. So what are the opportunities for higher education to embrace cannabis? How should, universities, especially community colleges here in California, be thinking about this industry and preparing for growth?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people in the industry have this saying where they're like, if you're doing it in another industry, you can do it in cannabis. Because truly, this is such a big industry that any job that you're having in a traditional industry, you can have that job in cannabis. And so right now, the industry, I think there's 320,000 plus people that are employed within the cannabis industry. It's growing so quickly. And so anything that, if you think about traditional consumer packaged goods industries, traditional agriculture industries, marketing industries, all of that we're going to need in cannabis. And so right now we're seeing a lot of that develop in real time. So for example, because I came from the advertising world and because I'm on the technology side now, we're starting to see more technology companies that are being built that are helping the brands, that are helping the retailers and building specific use cases for those sides of the supply chain. And as the industry becomes more mature, as we move towards federal legalization and we have Facebook and Instagram and mainstream publishers start allowing cannabis advertising campaigns as just one example, then you're going to start to see that whole industry boom, right? Because we see the traditional advertising world is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So you're going to see all those same types of companies. Those are all going to be available in cannabis. On the agriculture side, we're going to need farmers, we're going to need extractors, all of those types of roles you have in cannabis. So really every job that you would have in a traditional CPG or agriculture industry, we have that in cannabis, and it's all developing in real time. So it's just really exciting to be a part of and watch how many new companies and people are coming in.
What is your advice for people who want to get involved in the industry, and why should they get involved now, right? Because it's not an easy time to get involved. It is not federally legal. You can't get banking, right? There aren't educational pathways. There is no bachelor's that I know of in cannabis, right? You have to really go out and seek it if you want to be involved. Why is it important to kind of get involved now? And what will the gain be?
Well, I think the reason that it's so exciting to get involved now is because if you're in this right now, you're a pioneer. And if you're looking to come in this in the next couple of years, you are still a pioneer. You're being a part of something that is just being born. We don't even know what this is yet. And so that's very exciting. And that means also a lot of job security as the industry matures, because people are going to see you and say, wow, that person is a subject matter expert who has been involved in this industry from a very early period. They've really watched this industry grow. And I think it also signals to people that you're someone that is adaptable and that is okay with change. And that's a pretty specific person and skill set, because to be honest, in this industry, it's not for the faint of heart. This is a very, very challenging industry to be a part of. We're operating on a lot of unknowns. We're operating in a lot of instability. And what's happened is that's very hard on individuals oftentimes, because people don't like change generally. People like stability. And so if you are one of those people that is okay with that and thrives in that, oh my gosh, the opportunity is just truly so endless for you in this industry. You can do anything at this point. And so to your original question, what advice, it's that's my biggest this is what I did and what I think anyone who's passionate about this industry, this is a community. Cannabis is a community. When we think about how a lot of states moved into recreational, it was people run. It was because people came together and were pushing this with policymakers. And so that speaks to the fact that this really is a community. What other industries do we have that are just so much built on that ethos of that community? And so if you want to be successful in this, you have to get involved. And there are so many different events. It doesn't matter what state you're in. There are so many different opportunities to connect with people, even through the pandemic, just digitally. There's a lot of Zoom meetings. There's a lot of these groups, because it is such a community. People are looking to build trust with each other. They're looking to connect and learn. So you got to get involved. That's the first place I would start, is just get involved and show up and voice your opinion, voice what you care about, because this community is looking for authenticity. It's looking for people to be truthful, and because of that, it's allowed so many different people to enter this industry. You don't find one type of person in this industry. That's my favorite thing about it. You're getting people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and they're bound by this common idea, and it's impactful and powerful to be a part of that.
That's very cool. It's the craft culture of California. It's indigenous to California. Do you have a fear that California is going to lose this true, authentic love and culture as it gets bigger and bigger and larger players come into the field?
I do. Absolutely, I do. And I mean, just looking at it on the data side, it's Right now in California, the top 10 brands in the state are making up about 30% of the sales in the state. And so as the industry matures, I do think about, is this going to be comparative to traditional consumer packaged goods, beer, wine industries, where you'll see a handful of companies really owning market share? Now, I question that because cannabis isn't like those other industries, in my opinion, because cannabis touches people for so many different reasons. You're using it for, even if it's oftentimes a recreational reason, people are using it to sleep or to deal with anxiety and stress. And so I do think that affords a lot more opportunity for the craft side of this, for people to really understand, just like our food, like I want to eat organic food. I want to know where my food is coming from. And I think a lot of people really care about that. And I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to that even more so than ever we've seen in our society. And that presents a lot of opportunity for cannabis to really talk about your cultivation practices, talk about what makes your brand special and unique. And therefore, I think when I'm seeing a lot more brands that are sharing that story, I'm hopeful that people are going to care enough to where this isn't just going to become some commercialized industry. It's not going to be run by just a handful of companies, that it's going to afford a lot more opportunity for the craft producer.
That is very much dependent upon the policies that we have. It's dependent on the flow of capital. It's dependent on a lot of things. But as you're saying, this is the beginning. This is, right, nothing is set in stone. No one has come in. No one has market share. No one knows what's going to happen. So it's very important what people do today. And lastly, just thinking about the community colleges. They're kind of going out on a limb saying, hey, we want to embrace this, right? DVC, City College of San Francisco, Santa Rosa Junior College, there's all of these schools that are starting to build out programming. What advice do you have for them as they think about building out industry partnerships and creating coursework?
Okay, make sure you're talking to people from all different backgrounds and parts of the supply chain and all different perspectives, because you're going to start to see everyone has a different opinion on cannabis. And so you want to have a fair perception of the industry. And as you're crafting these programs, you want to hear from the craft cultivator. You want to hear from the corporate company. You want to hear from all sides of the industry to really make sure that this is a well-informed program and not just like the loudest voice kind of in the room. And it's like we're talking about with equity and just making sure that this is fair programs, fair policy. That means you're having conversations with diverse mindsets, people from very diverse backgrounds. So just make sure that you're having that inclusive mindset to really talk to everyone that's got a strong opinion on all different parts of the supply chain, small, medium, large businesses, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I think that is definitely important, and engaging industry is so important. Last thing, just what is your hope for this industry? What is the hope for all of the industry partners that you have, moving forward in the near term and into the years to come?
My hope, it's kind of what we're just talking about. My hope is that people are going to come into this industry of a mindset of non-judgment and openness, and really seek to understand how people are connecting to the plant and why. Because like we're talking about, you've got recreational opportunities, you've got medicinal opportunities, spiritual, you've got the material goods side. It just means so many different things to different people. And I don't think we're fully going to grasp or understand the impact of what cannabis can have on our society until we're listening without judgment and really seeking to understand each other. And as we're moving through this incredibly challenging next couple years as we mature as an industry, we really have to be of that mindset where we're listening to each other and taking that into account out of the spirit of what's going to be the best for our society as a whole. Because this could go many different directions, cannabis. And so let's do what's best for, the collective. And that starts with listening with non-judgment.
That is great advice. Love the approach that you're taking, the inclusive approach, kind of bridging the small cultivators and the big companies, embracing education, embracing the political process. Really hope to see you continue to thrive, Headset continue to thrive, and thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that was Jocelyn. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.